Right. If your life was a movie, what would it be?
Well, personally, I'd probably go to Venice, accidentally get kissed by a man, kind of fall a little bit in love, go back home, get into a weird engagement for some reason, because, why not? And then my old love comes back into my life, and then, shenanigans happen.
Welcome back to our podcast. I'm Darren.
And I'm Tim.
This is MovieBeings. Let's start with the obvious, the visuals of the movie.
The visuals?
What do you think about the visuals?
Well, before we get into that, should we cheers to Valentine's?
Yeah,
if we can get across...
Happy Valentine's Day. As you can see, we have all pink going around the studio today. Cheers.
Cheers. So back to the question.
Yeah, let's talk about the visuals.
I think that was one of my favorite things of this movie.
Okay.
It's just like a lot of the visuals. Because when I first started watching it, I'm like, this feels like a trailer for do you want to go to Venice? Because it captured a lot of different scenes throughout in the village, in the town itself, and all quite spectacular. I was like, oh, I can see why she wanted a room with a view.
I agree. It was my first time watching this movie before the podcast. Oh, there you go. And my first impression of the movie was every scenes is like a painting. At any point I think 99% of the time, if you pause the movie and you just look at that screen, it looks like a painting straight out of that era. Yeah.
Because when was it set? I was trying to figure out. Was it the late 18, just before the turn of the century? Because they had some vehicles in it.
Yeah.
And they were still using horse and cart.
Yeah.
So it must have been just before World War One. So probably in that period. Because I was trying to figure it out. I'm like,
yeah,
it looks older. Then I saw cars. I'm like, oh, it can't be.
It's quite strange. It's quite strange because the movie was released in 1985, but I think it was set up in the Middle Ages.
No, Middle Ages. That's
way off.
That's way off. This is before. I would say 1880 or even the early 19.
Okay. So just before the turn of the century.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's where I was thinking was situated. Because I think they did a relatively good job of capturing the era. Because it didn't feel it is an 80s movie, and it does feel a bit from an 80s, but it does a very good job. I don't think there was a point where I'm like, oh, this feels out of place or anything. It did a very good job of recapturing the era, I felt.
Yeah. And I mean, the movie won an Oscar for costume design.
I'm not surprised. They were pretty good.
I mean, the costume and the landscape are spectacular, and it really helped me to immerse in the world. I think when you watch a movie, world building and immersion is really important. If you
it can
don't
make a
feel
huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely, and
makes it feel lived in and real. It's hard sometimes because we get a lot of CG movies now. You can when you notice it's CG, you're like, oh, I can tell they're standing in a green room.
Yeah. But
there's nothing wrong with that, but I think you can tell the difference when it's filmed at at
location.
At Venice. You can tell it's not we've got a couple of rooms and it's all the rest of the shot are CG. But even then, I guess it was probably still fairly new, so it was not obviously they're never going to use it for that.
Yeah.
But
so this movie was shot in two different locations. I think one is in Italy. Yeah. And the other one is in London, in England.
England, yeah.
Yeah, but the scenery is breathtaking. The framing, the lighting that they chose for each scene is very well thought out. And it really helped because I think a lot of the newer movies now, they want to do a period drama. But then all the settings look very modern.
Or even they look new. I think that's always hard to do, make something look lived in and made it feel like it's been there. Because obviously with a set, it's going to be brand new or whatever, but it's always hard to keep a bit of the grit, especially back then. Everything's not going to be sparkling clean. I was going to say everything's not sparkling clean now, but I mean you live in stuff for a lot longer back then than you would now.
And probably, when the movie came out, the filming technology wasn't that great as well. So
I think it was all right, but compared to what it is now, nothing compared to
can you imagine that movie was shot in 4K? Like you can see all the details, all the cracks.
Then it would feel like a bloody ad for Venice, because it would have been. I felt like it already looked pretty good without like being in like the highest resolution we've got at the moment.
So out of all the characters in this movie, there are so many characters.
There's too many.
But before we get into that, talk to me about why you wanted to do this movie for Valentine's Day.
Well, when we're thinking about it, like I don't really watch romance movies at all. And I was talking to my mum about it, and she was like, "Oh, why not watch this Room with a View?" And I was like, "Oh, why not? Anything I'm going to come up with is not going to be any better." And I hadn't watched it, so I thought, be a good choice.
Yeah, it was a good choice. It was my first time watching that movie as well. And I think overall, it really captured the essence of a romantic movie. You know, it's set in a foreign country, beautiful sceneries, beautiful people. Yeah, you cannot help but falling in love if you go to those cities.
It was a bit weird that she didn't fall in love with like an Italian man, and it turned out to be another British dude that was just like happened to be there at the same time. But
good point.
You know, but it is what it is.
I mean, what do you think about Lucy? So Lucy is our main character.
Yeah.
Lucy Honeychurch is
Honeychurch.
Honeychurch.
Great last name.
So what do you think about her?
I think she was an interesting character because I think she's 16 at the start of the film. I don't know if they bring up ages again, but she's fairly young when she's in Venice, and she's with her. I think it's her auntie. Charlotte. Is it Charlotte?
Cousin.
It's her cousin.
Yes. I double checked, and it turns out Charlotte is her cousin. Even though Charlotte is a lot older than Lucy.
Yeah, she looks a bit older, but like that's what I was thinking. I thought maybe it's her mum's sister or something, but. Because she's like her chaperone to make sure she doesn't get into any trouble, apparently. And that doesn't really work out that well.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting character because she's kind of here and she's like, the whole setup is the Room with the View. And then there's these two other British guys that are there, another family, and she talks to them about it. And like, you can have our room. You know, it's got a lovely view. And then they thought back then it's all about the implications of things. You don't want to look like you've implicated into something that's unwomanly, because it's like, these two men have given me a room. Does this mean something's going on? That's like nearly the whole gist of this movie. Something happening. Because it's like, if we get caught with a man or talking to a man, it's like going to seem unseemly. And it's like, obviously it's like set in an older period, and it's like, feels a bit weird. But she still feels like a strong character even with that, because she kind of objects to that a lot. It's like, what's wrong with me doing this? Because, shouldn't matter that much.
My first impression of Lucy was, I usually see Helen Bonham Carter in anything but this types of movie, in a romantic. The first movie that I saw of her was Fight Club. And it's
that's a completely different character.
Completely different character. And
surprisingly, another movie without Johnny Depp.
How old was Johnny when this movie came out? Probably he was too young.
No, he probably would have been. I think she's probably is a bit older than Johnny. But I'm just saying because they've been in a lot of movies together. But
maybe Johnny would have made a good George.
Does he come across? Is he American? I think Johnny Depp is American, but I don't think he would have been. I'm just thinking of you, and I'm like, I think it was all right to have someone else, but.
But Helena Bonham Carter, she was in the Harry Potter series as a witch, and it's very strange to see her play a character who is a complete opposite of her, of what I know of her throughout her career. She played Lucy, a very innocent, very emotionally oppressed character. But I thought that she was beautiful. She plays the part really well. If anyone who would fall in love with her, then she comes across as a person that has a lot of qualities for you to fall in love with her. But Lucy does have quite a few conflicts throughout the movie, but it's very subtle.
Yeah, because like I was saying before, because they never want to really bring it up of what it could implicate or what's going to happen to them. So it is like interesting to see how she deals with them. There's no, like, it's always hard to deal with these kinds of things anyway, let alone being like a young woman in like, a world that really oppresses women a bit to like, they have to kind of sit in their role and not really go out of that. Because early on, one of my favorite scenes when she's playing piano for the first time, she's playing Beethoven, and the pastor's like, "Oh, you seem like a normal, put-together girl. You're playing Beethoven." So I think you've got like a wild future ahead of you. I'm like, bro, that's a bit presumptuous, isn't it? Can't you just play Beethoven without there being some kind of weird presumption she's going to be some wild person later? I was like, oh, I just thought it was funny.
and to be fair, like, does that mean that they, in their minds back then, Beethoven is like the opposite of the society standard? So he's supposed to be the bad boy?
Yeah, I guess.
He's supposed to be the Elvis of the classical music world?
Well, that's what it seems like. It's like, oh, it's more of a wild... The way it's played, it feels a bit more wild and not like put together.
Too passionate.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably a better word. Too passionate. Where it's kind of strange. It's like, well, I feel like if you like a song, it doesn't have to define you, does it? But I just thought that was a funny moment. And the way, I don't know if you remember the scene, he's like sitting in like the dark and she finishes and he kind of just like approaches. I'm like, what the hell is he doing? He's just creeping on this young girl playing the piano.
Yeah, and it turns out he's a priest?
Yeah, they call them pastors. That's what I was saying, a priest, but that's like same deal. Yeah. But that's weirder as well, right? Like, oh.
He's a bit of a strange character. What's his name? Mr. Beeb.
Yeah,
Mr. Beeb. He's a very a bit weird character. It's just the way that he talks, the way that he carries himself. It's just like he tries to come across as a very proper Englishman, but the actions and the content.
Yeah, he's not quite. He's not quite put together. Especially for like you'd say a pastor who's like a religious man. He still feels a bit kind of free-willing and, you know, not too, like, we do meet another pastor later in the movie where he's, like, probably more what you would expect, kind of like a bit proper, you know, kind of not happy with things that happen and, like, says that, like, when they're going out to the field and they're in the what do you call it? The guy driving or controlling the horse, and he's making out with his girl there. And the pastor's like, and then he's like, stop that now, you bloody stop that right now. And then they're like, the other people are like, oh, whatever, and like kicks her off.
Yes,
I don't know where they were. That's what I remember. I'm like, they just kick her off and she has to walk back. And I'm like, she could have come with you. And then
I was thinking that he was going to ask her to move to the other carriage.
Go to the other carriage or something. But
no, you get off the carriage.
You're off.
You walk home.
You're walking home. I'm like, it's a bit unfair. A bit brutal.
But the scene that you were talking about, like after Lucy played the piano for the first time and she played Beethoven, and that scene contains a very, I guess, popular line that Mr. Beep told her, if she lives her life as she plays the piano, it will be very exciting for her and the audience. Yeah. And I think, you know, it's a very good line, you know, and it seems like he understands that Lucy is emotionally oppressed and she has a lot of different experiences that she wants to go through, but she can't.
Yeah. Because Charlotte literally is like the image of that, of her like trying to stop her. Yeah. Or like trying to get in the way of things happening because she's meant to protect her from these things or whatever.
It's so weird to see Professor McGonagall acting like a chaperone.
Well, yeah. Well, obviously she's been in a lot of movies, but yeah, obviously that's what people are probably going to remember her from. But it was quite, I don't know, it was just hilarious all the times that she'd be like, no, you can't do that. Stop that now.
Do you have any other favorite characters in here?
I feel like there's so many characters.
Yeah, there's so many characters.
I don't know, I like Charlotte, but I found her interesting as well because like all the stuff she kind of goes through, she goes from like, later in the movie when there's the big kiss scene, and then she knows about it and she's like, we can't tell anybody about it. Later on, she tells her writer friend about it and she puts it in her book, and that's how she finds out about it. She reads it in the book and then she goes to Char's like, how could you tell her? And she's like,
I didn't.
Yeah, that's just like, I thought it was hilarious. It's just like, we won't tell anyone. And she's like, oh, what about my friend that writes books?
And her writer's friend is Dame Judi Dench.
Yeah, as well.
Who is M from 007.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine her acting in any different roles, but, you know, she's...
Well, I was going to say, she's also been acting for a long time. I think she still does drama and stuff. Yeah. Which I thought, which is kind of interesting with this movie. I felt like it was presented more as like a drama, like a live stage drama more than a movie, because there was like two sets. It's like Venice and England, and they'd always like pop up. It's like, oh, here's like all the players in the game essentially, and like popped up their names and stuff like that. And I thought that was like an interesting way to portray it, to portray the movie as well. But apart from Charlotte, I'm trying to think. Because there's so many characters, and I feel like you kind of get... Frank was interesting. Her brother, he's kind of like a goofball.
Freddie, you mean?
Is it Freddie? Freddie,
yeah,
sorry.
It's Freddie, yeah.
Freddie.
It's Freddie. But besides the main characters, I don't know. Like, I can't really relate to George. It's very hard. Yeah, he's a bit of a weird kid.
Even for like being weird, he was weird. Because they like... Initially, there's like the question mark thing. He's like writing question marks.
Yeah.
Did they even resolve that? It's just like a thing he does.
No. I mean, if you see someone writing question marks on furniture, you turn the other way and you run away as fast as you can.
I don't know. Maybe go slowly. They might notice. But that's what I thought. I was like watching it. I'm like, oh, the Riddler's in this. What's going on?
Yeah, well, I mean, it turns out like that was a bit of a underwhelming scene, you know, like Charlotte and Lucy found a question mark behind the painting, and they was like, oh, what's this? George just casually walked in and turned it around
and walks out,
and then they never talk anything about it.
He doesn't say a word, and I'm like, okay. I already thought he was weird, but
another eccentric character is Cecil, played by Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, who's
the amazing Daniel Day-Lewis.
He's the fiance.
Well, I mean, he played a butcher in The Gangs of New York.
Oh, right. But he's played. Yeah, he's not another actor that's been in a lot of stuff as well.
Yeah. But yeah, he's the fiance. We can talk about him a bit later. But why don't we talk about like your least favorite scene? Or, you know, set piece. It doesn't have to be scenes because there are so many.
I know there's so many scenes. That's what I was trying to think. Because I don't think there was any like terrible scenes. I noticed there was one shot. I don't know if it was deliberate. I think it was when, what was the writer's name? But I think they're like talking together and the camera was like shaking a little bit in the shot. And I'm like, I didn't notice this.
I didn't notice that.
It was like shaking. I'm like, did the cameraman not get it? Like all the other shots seemed like I didn't see that like again from memory, and it was like shaking a bit. Not that it was a bad scene. I was just like, oh, this is odd.
Yeah.
I will say the whole kissing scene's a bit. I think the shot's kind of beautiful, but he kind of like grabs her neck.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is. I'm guessing it's meant to be a bit like forceful, but I was like,
yeah,
it's a bit brutal.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how well this scene will be in this
like in this modern era. It's probably a bit like that's meant to be the. I think that's meant to be the thing. He's like a bit forceful, but it's just like it felt a bit brutal because it's like I was like, oh Jesus, like
I watched one of the interviews with Helena Carter, and
was that like a bit? Is this a bit like newer, or is it like closer to the movie?
No, newer. So you know, I think when the movie came out in 1985, in 2015 they did a 30th anniversary, and I think she did an interview and she was talking about that scene. So that whole scene was improvised. So
that makes a bit more sense because it does look a bit. It does feel improvised.
But, you know, like the only thing that they knew at the time was the director. I forgot his name, but the director. So he pretty much just said, okay, so this scene, the two characters will kiss. So make it happen. So Julian Sands, he pretty much just came over to Helena and just grabbed her by the neck and started kissing her.
Yeah, that's what I was like, that's because it does feel a bit, he like grabs her and it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't grab her by the neck because he kind of pulls it away later and I'm like, I think it does capture like that character well in the way they kind of kissed, just because he's kind of a bit awkward and a bit like new, but it is quite passionate as well. But it was very, I felt like it was good for like the movie, like what, you know, because later on you see her kissing Cyril for the first time.
Yeah.
And it's also awkward in a different way, but you can tell the like difference between like the passion behind it. Where I think they captured that quite well.
Yeah, I throughout the movie, like so George's dad, Mr. Emerson, he kind of
he's a character I like.
Yeah,
I feel like he's very honest and to the point.
Yeah, like but the first half of the movie, they set him up as a very weird and a bit goofy character.
Yeah,
like he talks funny. He talks funny about his son as well.
Because initially, he seems nice because he's like, oh, I don't want anything from you guys. You can have the room with the view. But later on in the film, I think it's when she's in the museum and she like goes to her and is like, oh, hey, can you like, I don't want you to do anything with my son, but can you like talk to him? Because he's in like a weird period of life and he's in a new country. It'd be interesting to have him kind of like talk to a woman. Because we don't really see him. I think he only talks like a couple of times. He doesn't really talk much through the whole movie really until a bit later. But he's like, oh, can you like talk to him to kind of get him out of his shell a bit? And
yeah, I don't want you to fall in love with him.
Yeah, and I was just like, okay.
Like it's like, what is it called? Overshadowing. Like
yeah.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, foreshadowing. And I was like, it was kind of knew it was happening anyway, but I'm like, oh, okay. But it was also a bit weird. I felt a bit weird about it as well because it's like, oh, we don't want anything for this room. But then later on, he asked her for a favor anyway.
Yeah. Oh, what was the favor? I
was just so she would hang out with his son.
Yeah. My son is a bit special.
Yeah, and he's like wants
he's
him.
A friend.
Yeah, and that's what I was like. I'm like, oh, you did ask for something anyway. But even the next scene that came out of nowhere when they're like, she walks into like the plaza and two men are like fighting, and the guy gets like murdered, and I was watching it. I'm like. What?
Yeah, absolutely. That was my reaction as well.
I was like, a very weird scene.
Yes.
I was like, I'm guessing that was meant to, I don't know. Every time I think, I'm like, I don't know how. I think it was meant to be for them to like get closer maybe in a weird way. But it's such a weird scene. Initially, I was like, did he just punch him and he bled? And I'm like, oh, he probably got stabbed or something, right? Yeah. Because it looks so weird.
My first thought of the scene, after I finished the movie was, Lucy is she doesn't have much life experience, so
obviously shocking.
Yeah, so that was kind of representation of violence because she grew up in a very protective world. Because
I think they're in the countryside.
Yeah, but
they bring that up a bit later. So,
but I think she's from like a high class society.
Yeah, they're like. I think it was her father that was well off. It sounded like. I think her mother said she wasn't as well off, but. It must have been from her father's side because I remember at one point in the movie she's like, "Oh, I don't know how to play the piano. I'm not like an intellectual," and stuff like that. So obviously it was from her dad's side, probably where the money comes from, I assume.
Interesting.
But I don't know. Maybe everyone in England lives in a lovely castle in the countryside. But yeah, it was like it was meant to be shocking. She does the whole. It felt like such a dramatic feint. The whole like. I was like, oh, that looks like someone's like, this is how like you must think. Like it's like, it was like so to the point. And I was like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, like, would you have fainted if you see some guy vomiting blood right in front of you?
I don't know if I would have fainted. If I was 16, I probably would have done what the other George would have done, which is like kind of stare at it because,
what's going on here?
Yeah, like, I've never seen someone. Well, at that point, he probably hadn't died, but he dies a little bit later. But it's just like, as a young man, you're like, this is kind of cool. Not realizing, someone's dead.
Yeah.
Probably not really thinking of like that deeply.
But that situation escalated so quickly.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It started out as a fight. And, Lucy was looking over and two guys were arguing. They were shuffling each other and then started fighting. I was like, okay, this is a good life experience for an experienced girl. Okay, she's witnessing violence for the first time. And then one of the guys just started vomiting blood, and then the first thing that the other Italians did was carrying him to the fountain and get the water to splash on him. I mean, I'm surprised. Don't they have doctors at the time? Or?
Well, they would have had doctors and stuff, but it's such a shocking thing. What do you do when someone's like dying? And it's not like, an ambulance does come, but it's like, a guy in a car.
Yeah.
So it's not, it's not like he's probably gone. Like there's not like, even if they do get him to a hospital or whatever, but it was quite dramatic, him like lying there bleeding profusely and they're just like splashing him with water. I'm like, I don't know how much of that's going to help.
and of course, after witnessing that, Lucy fainted. George M came over to her rescue. And she woke up, and then the first thing that she asked was, "Where are my photographs?"
Yeah,
and they never resolved the photographs.
No, they do.
Yeah.
So she loses them. She asks George, "Hey, can you go get my photos?" So he goes back over to get them, and they've got a bit of blood on them, and he puts them in his coat, and then she like goes to walk away, and it's like, "Oh no, something's happened." He like has this whole weird thing with her, and I'm like, "What is this?" It was such a weird conversation when they're like standing over like the river or must have been a river they were standing over. Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, what about my photos?" And he's like, "They got a bit of blood on them. I didn't want to say anything." And then he like gets them and like instantly just throws them into the river. And I'm like, "Oh, That's a bit weird.
I mean, like, you could have taken them out of the envelopes and see which photos can still be saved.
But
he just threw them all away.
I think that was also meant to be like a bit dramatic as well, but it just made him weirder, I felt like.
I really don't understand the meaning of that set piece.
I think it was more like we were saying before about how women are meant to be like, not meant to be involved in this kind of thing. It's all like, you know, they can't deal with it. You know, they're going to faint. So when he found blood, he's probably like, oh, I can't show that to her. That's just going to upset her more. She just fainted not long ago. This has probably upset her. I assume this is what he's thinking anyway.
Yeah.
Even though I felt like he could have just taken the envelope out, like, oh, it's got a bit of blood, and then like given her the photos anyway. But it was a bit dramatic to be like, oh, it's got blood, and he like takes it out, and he's like, oh, off into the river, and I'm like, she's like, oh.
Yeah, my photographs.
Could have, you know, how long they take to get developed now? I can't just plop them on a computer and upload them.
In one of the interviews for that scene, you know, like how they shot that set piece in a lower angle.
Oh yeah.
You know, like
you see the from fence, the other side.
So you see the fence, you see them leaning on the fence, and it turns out it was an intentional choice, because when they were shooting that scene in Italy, the traffic was horrendous. Like the whole highway behind them was like full of cars, full of traffic. So they had to shoot that scene in a lower angle so the characters cover the roads behind them.
Well, that's very clever, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like when you have troubles and you have to think of solutions, right? But during that set piece, George said something like, something happened between you and me, and then it's like,
I thought that was really weird. That's what I was like, is this the setup for their romance? It is extremely weird. A man dies, he gets the photos, throws them off into a river. That's like setting him up. He is a strange man, but that's what I like when they had the kiss a bit later. I'm like, where's the
chemistry? Where's the development?
I felt like they needed like maybe another scene for them or something.
Another 30 minutes for that added to the movie.
Yeah, I know it was a long movie anyway, but I don't know. I felt like it just needed one more thing to like understand it. Yeah. Like I can see it from like, oh, maybe like they've had a weird experience together, okay, but it didn't feel romantic. It was a very strange moment.
I mean, he did come in to save her from
that's what I thought
from the fall.
And I was like, okay, that's kind of thoughtful. But then he's like, he gets the photos with the blood, and then also goes and watches the man die, and I'm like, oh, this is like not very romantic. Like if he like whisked her away or something.
After watching that scene, my interpretation of that scene was, she witnessed death right in front of her, so it's something traumatic. And then when she was in that kind of state of mind, you know, I think her mind was, I guess, more open. So when George came over to rescue her, maybe she realized that there's some kind of chemistry going on here. You know, I'm not supposed to be close to a man like this, but he's carrying me, he's helping me, he's telling me to wait, etc. So I think my interpretation was like, you know, in such a short moment, she experienced a lot of different.
Because she is quite embarrassed as well. She does say, talk to him later. Or it might have been continuing from that scene where she's like, oh, this is kind of embarrassing. Can you not, like, can it just be between us? Like, that's like another thing. It's like a secret between them as well. Because it's like, it's embarrassing that a woman's fainted. Where I was like, you watch someone like get stabbed. I'm not going to hold it against you. Did you hear she fainted after watching someone get murdered? Wow. How thoughtless. She should have stood there like a woman and taken it, I guess. I was just like, oh, this is a weird thing.
But I think that she meant more about the fact that she was involved with a man.
It could have been that as well. Yeah, like, that's probably more likely, but it just came strange. It felt strange. I'm like, it couldn't be that bad that she fainted. Not that embarrassing.
And straight after that conversation they had next to the river, Lucy came back home to England. And
was it right after that?
Yeah, right.
Because I think she goes and talks to Charlotte, and Charlotte's
after
no, it would have been the kiss. Because they come back from the kiss, and she like tells Charlotte about it, and then she's like, well, no, Charlotte walked in on it, right? Yeah. At the end of the kiss, she walks in and is like,
So that was their first kind of interaction. The second interaction was when they were going somewhere on the one or two horse carriages.
Yeah, they were going on like a little picnic trip because I felt that strange as well when she like finds him kissing him, because she was sitting there with the writer and they're like having a chat, and she like they all sit down and she didn't have like a little thing to sit on, and she like kind of goes And then she's like insinuating that like, oh, can you please get off so me and my friend can like sit here in private. She's like, oh, I'll go sit with the other people. And then so she sends her off in the first place. And then she's mad that she's like found George and they're kissing. And she's like, oh, how could they? She caught up pretty quick because they were gossiping. Her and the writer were gossiping for quite a while. I was like, damn, she's quick.
So that kind of picnic scene, it was set up like there was another pastor.
Yeah.
And
we meet him at the museum.
Yeah. He was a tour guide.
And is it Mr. Emmett?
Mr. Emmett.
He's like making jokes and cracking jokes, and the pastor did not like it. He's like, there's too many people speaking. I'm going to go to the next thing and like comment on the next thing. And he was just like, oh.
Mr. Emerson is a fun character. You know, he's I think he's a bit more realistic than the other characters.
Because I think everyone's quite proper.
Yes.
And he's the only one that's kind of
a
bit jovial.
Yeah.
He's not too fussed about how everything's perceived. Because that's what early when he was giving him the room, he was like, oh, it shouldn't be such a big deal. We're just like, you know, we're not too, his whole thing is like, oh, I'm not too fussed about the view because the view's in here, you know, I don't need the view. Okay. And that's like the whole thing.
Okay.
And he's like, oh no, there's going to be, you know, nothing, you know, there's no thing here. You just can have it. Like that's the whole thing.
And then during the picnic trip, the Italian carrier was sitting with his sister. That was a bit controversial. So obviously he was making out with her, and then you know the pastor asked him, "Okay, who's this?" And, oh, this is my sister. And then he came back to making out with her. I was like, obviously this is not your sister. But Mr. Emerson was talking to the pastor, and he was like, "Oh, just leave the kids alone."
Yeah, let them have their fun because that's what he means. It's just like whatever.
Yeah,
it's not really bothering you.
Yeah. He's quite open-minded. He's one of the open-minded parent. And what was Lucy doing when she was looking for George? She wasn't looking for George.
She was looking for the other
Mr.
guys.
Emerson.
Yeah, she was going to go hang out with them or just see what they were doing.
Yeah.
But obviously, she ends up finding George and they have their like moment. Even before that, when they like first get there and they go off, the other group goes up and George like starts climbing a tree.
Yeah.
And he like falls out of the tree. I'm like, is this guy like 12?
Was he yelling something?
He was yelling as well. I can't remember what he was yelling, but I was like, damn.
Man-child.
Right. Yeah, I was like, whatever.
Man-child.
I know they're meant to be, I think they're both meant to be like teenagers or in their like youth. But I was like, oh, he's such a strange character.
Yeah. And when Lucy was looking for Mr. Emerson and she found the Italian carrier and she asked him, where is Mr. Emerson? I think the carrier misunderstood. I think she was looking for the son instead of the father.
Yeah.
And when we got to the barley field, they had their forceful kiss. Charlotte was there.
I still don't, she zoomed in. I don't know how she must have had her broom.
Yeah, she turned herself into a cat. So what happened after that? My memory is kind of blurry.
So after that happens, they go back to the hotel, and Charlotte's like, "We're leaving now. You can't be fraternizing with the boy. He's going to tell everybody. He's going to like, oh, I've been kissing her, and like, you know, take away from her pride. It's like, oh, she's made out with a boy that, you know, they're not involved or whatever." And she's like, it doesn't matter. I don't think he'll tell anyone. I think it'll be all right. Let me talk to him. She's like, no. We're leaving. We're leaving tonight. And that's like the whole thing. And then she's like, I think it'll be all right. And then like just before she like almost runs into him. And then she shuts the door and is like, no, I'm speaking to him. And then she like goes and speaks to him. And then I think that's like after that, they return to England.
What did Charlotte talk to George about? I forgot the conversation.
I can't remember it either, but I'm assuming it was just about like, hey, don't say anything about the kiss or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. And then straight after that, we got cut to the next scene where they are back in London.
She's back home with her family.
And I think this is 1 year later. It's just not like straight after the trip. This is 1 year after that.
Because that's what I always remember. I'm like, because it goes straight into like the engagement. Because it's like the next scene's like them. She's like talking to a guy and they're like, oh, Cecil. And then
he was taking her hand in.
Yeah.
And then he walked back into the room to announce the engagement to Freddie and
her mother. I can't remember her mother's name, but Mrs. Honeychurch.
Mrs. Honeychurch.
But it was such a strange contrast. I'm like, oh,
that's quick.
Yeah, because I was like, oh, there was no setup for Cyril at all, really, that I remember. It was just literally to the next. Because I assume they're trying to set up the love triangle straight away. But I feel like there could have been a little bit more leading into it, but because I was like, oh shit, I'm like, she was just making out with George not long ago, and I was like, oh, here we are, she's engaged to another guy that we've never met.
Yes. What do you think about Cecil?
He was an interesting man, but very. He's another strange dude as well.
I mean, tell me one character that isn't a bit strange in.
I guess they're all. I guess technically they're all a bit strange,
except for Mr. Emerson Senior.
Yeah, strangely enough, he seems like the most normal out of all of them. You know, he doesn't really abide by their like current day standards too much. But yeah, Cyril was such an interesting. As soon as he kind of walks in with the little glasses and stuff, and he's a bit proper. Because I think Frankie before kind of says he's not really a fan of him when they're like talking outside.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, she's probably like something's going on between them that he's not really too happy about.
Visually, like Daniel Day-Lewis looks very dapper in that.
I think they capture the character very well because that's what he's meant to come across as. Is this kind of like very proper man.
Yeah, a bit of a snob.
Because I think that's meant to be the contrast, right, between him and George.
Yes.
George is a bit more outgoing.
Yes.
Kind of
wild.
A bit wild in the moment. You know, a bit more passionate. Cyril's a bit more put together, thinking about his own image. You know, and you know he isn't too worried. You know, about like other things. He's like, oh, I'm worried about my appearance and how I appear to other people. And I've got to keep my, appearances up.
And he likes to read, and he's involved in a lot of different aspects of art. You know, he's into painting, he's into music. You know, like when Lucy was playing after the engagement announcement, and, you know, he was standing there admiring her playing. And But my interpretation of that kind of reaction was after he saw her play, he turned around to the crowd, and then he has a bit of a smirk on his face, like, yeah, this is my fiance, you know, like things like that.
I think, because they insinuate this a bit later on in the movie, but he's kind of more interested in what she can do than her as a person, which they like show on a bit later. And then also, because this is back at his family's house, because his mum's there. And she's like, oh, did you see her? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, when we're going to have kids, I think I'm like, what did he say? He's like, I'm going to teach them, go to Venice and teach them in Venice, and then come back and live in the countryside. So they're going to be like her or whatever, be like this exquisite kind of thing to show off. And I'm like, this is weird.
Yes. When did Cecil and Lucy have their walk? Is this like, so, you know, this is after the piano playing, and then I think they had a bit later. Like a tea party or something?
Because they do go to the lake or the little pond thing. They do that walk, and I think that's a bit... I think that's a bit late. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah. So I think it was during like a tea party, and, you know, they were hanging out with
it must have been like an engagement party.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Yes. And one of their friends...
she asked, she's like, oh, is it all right if I go for a walk?
Yes. And I think during that party, one of their friends was looking for renters.
Oh, they were talking about that they had a house that they want, who they're going to put in it. And there was two old ladies that she ran into in Venice. And she was like, oh, it'd be good for them maybe. And she was like, oh, let's do that. And then later on, Cyril runs into the Emersons?
Yeah, the Emersons. Yeah.
And then he like gives the house to them.
Yes.
I can't remember his reasoning. Is it because they were like traveling, or I think something about them that he thought was...
Yes. You are not wrong. So
because he didn't know them, but I can't remember what he liked about them, but he's like, oh, I thought it'd be kind of cool to give them the house or whatever. And she's like, oh, you went over my head.
But it's not his house. It's his friend's house. But I think the main reason why he wanted to give the Emerson to rent a place is they are like the complete opposite of them, and he wanted to teach his friend a lesson. Not to just focus on that social class. And I think he was, and I think Cecil was thinking, oh, you know, this family here is might be troublesome, so they might cause some trouble to my friend. It's like to teach him a kind of lesson. Like, yeah, it's a very strange logic.
But it's obviously to get George into the scene,
the plot armor.
But it was because that's why it's weird. It's like, oh, Cecil unknowingly ruined his marriage or his engagement.
So during that party, they had that walk, and they walked past the pond, and Cecil was talking about himself. You know, I'm a bit of a Italian and Londoner. You know, like I relate to Italy and England only. And then they walk past the pond, and Lucy was like, "Oh, Freddie likes to take a bath here," and they had their first kiss there. And so on the internet, people kind of voted that this is like the worst kiss of all time.
Damn, that's brutal.
Yeah.
But I think that's what it's meant to be.
It's meant to be like awkward.
It's meant to be like an awkward thing. Because he's like, oh, we've never really kissed before. And he's like, oh. She's like, yeah, we're in, you know, you can kiss me. And he kind of like...
He's still wearing the glasses.
Yeah, it's kind of like weird. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But you could see it wasn't really... Like I was saying before, there's like no passion behind it. It is literally kind of just like, oh, let's see what this is like. And then I was like,
yeah. I mean that kissing scene. I think I agree with you. It's supposed to be awkward. It's supposed to be lack of chemistry. If you compare the two lacks of chemistry between Lucy and George and Lucy and Cecil, you know, like the kissing scene between Lucy and Cecil is definitely the loser here. And I guess they want to demonstrate like they're not supposed to be together. You know, like there are so many things wrong. Lucy is always like very lively, and George is always very proper with his books. And then you know, like
because it's more of like a societal marriage. It was kind of like, oh, here's this kind of like upper class man, you know,
upper class lady.
They're
supposed to be together.
Yeah, they should probably get together.
Yes,
and obviously he sees as like, oh, all these traits that I'm like, oh, I can, you know, this is something I can show off.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Interesting.
Because he mentions it like, oh, her piano playing, how she's been to Venice and stuff, and like kind of things he can speak and show off about. Because he says early, I think it's at the engagement party, he's like, he asks him what he do, and he's like, well, in lame terms, he literally says, I don't have a job. Because he obviously has so much money, he can do whatever he wants and it doesn't matter. And it's like, oh, so he's kind of, you know, unemployed, but not that obviously it didn't matter because they have so much money anyway. But it's just funny the way he talks about it like it's like a higher thing, and the other guys are like, he's like, I wish I could kind of thing. I'm like, yeah, I don't blame you. I don't have to work hard. I can just carry on with my little spectacles and wander around and glare at things.
Yeah,
but because I think it does a better job of setting up Cyril for what he is compared to George. Because, like, the whole George thing is just like, oh, he's just... I guess, like, him just being a wild, controllable person that you have no idea what's going on with him. Where Cyril, I feel like it does a better job of setting up his character about, like... He's kind of wants... Kind of, like, what he wants out of the world and stuff, and he kind of goes for it.
Yeah.
Where, like... We don't really get that with George until, like, it kind of has to happen later in the movie when he comes back in.
Yeah.
Which is also a strange thing when she runs into George for the first time.
Yeah.
If you remember that scene, the other great scene in the movie. So the Emersons move in, and I think Frankie comes with the pastor, and he's like, hey, let's go down to bathe in the
Was that the first time that Freddie meets George?
Yeah. Because they walk into the house, and it's like, you want to go bathe? Yeah. Like the first thing that shoots out of his mouth. And I was like, and they're like, well, you're straight to the point. And I think George is like, oh, yeah, let's go. And the pastor joins them. And they strip to the nude.
Yep.
This scene surprised me so much. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then they get the pastor in on it as well. And then he's jumping in there in the nude as well. And they're all frolicking around, having a great time. And I'm like, I was not expecting this from this movie.
Yes.
I thought it was hilarious.
That scene was both shocking and hilarious at the same time. And during one of the interviews with the director, he said, okay, so for this scene, the three actors...
He didn't just tell them to make out?
No, he didn't. And what he said during the interview was, okay, so I know that the three actors will go skinny dipping. What is seen is seen. What is not seen is not seen.
He just lets them... Well, I was going to say, they just kind of... I think they're in the pool and they start messing around. And when they just start chasing each other, that's when I was like, this is crazy. Like, I kind of get it because this feels like more of a childish thing.
Yes.
Which was like fine, but it also felt a little bit inappropriate.
Yes.
But, you know, it seemed very juvenile. Like, it did just seem like a thing they just run around having fun. It didn't seem like there was any malice behind it at all or whatever. But it was pretty hilarious.
Do you think that they intentionally put that scene in just to maintain the audience
interest
and attention?
Well, I don't think so. I think that was meant to be another shocking scene for seeing George again, because they were going for another walk. It was
Cecil, Lucy, and her mother. Yeah.
And then when they come upon them, they all like freak out a little bit. And then she's like, "Oh, George is here."
Yeah.
And then Cecil...
He's naked.
Yeah, and Cecil was doing the whole thing. He's like, "Oh, avert your eyes. We'll like walk away."
Yeah.
I do love when they walk away and Frankie's just there hiding like this. And then the mother's like, "What are you doing? Come on." He's like... I thought it was great.
And then Cecil was acting like Indiana Jones for some reason. "Follow me, Mr.
Yeah. And he was like whipping the ferns around. I'm like...
What are you doing?
But this is kind of... I thought that was hilarious as well. The whole scene was kind of funny.
That skinny dipping scene is super controversial. Like on IMDb, a lot of, speaking of IMDb, this movie is rated 7.2 out of 10 out of 47,000 reviews.
Well, it's been around a while, so I probably had a fair
But
fair
then
reviews.
On Rotten Tomatoes, the audience scored 85%.
Well, Rotten Tomatoes, it just works on positive and negative.
Yeah.
If it's got more positive, it boosts it a lot higher. Where IMDb, I think it just aggregates the numbers.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not a huge fan of Rotten Tomatoes, because it's just like, if everything gets like a 7, it pushes it up a lot more than you'd say. Yeah. Where it's like, I don't think 7's bad for me. I don't think it was like a bad movie. I think if you enjoy kind of romance movies, I'm sure there's something there for you.
Yeah.
But like, I do think it's like a good movie, but that's what I mean. Like, it's weird. It's always weird looking at like reviews before going in. I think it's good for like if it's a terrible movie.
Yes.
If they say it's terrible, probably going to be terrible.
Yes.
But when it's like between like 6, 7, you're like, I think it's onto your preferences.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
I think it's a good perspective. I don't like reading movie reviews before I see them. I usually yeah. I mean,
unless I'm really iffy on a movie.
Yeah. But speaking of reviews, I collected a few reviews from IMDb that I want to share with you.
Is this like a share the bad review thing, or is this like controversial?
No, I mean, I thought that these reviews are quite funny.
Yeah.
Like obviously this movie has a very big audience. A lot of people will like this movie, so I won't share the positive the positive reviews, but I just collected a few funny ones. So one of the reviews says, "I have a personal bias against this movie, which was another one of those films that was not available theater screening on my area." So they hated the movie because it was not available for screening in their area, in the theater. So I have a bias against this movie.
So they would have had to... So like, whenever he wrote... Does it say the date he wrote the review?
I think it was in 2000 and... No. It's quite recent.
So
it's quite
literally
recent.
like 30 to 40 years ago. Essentially, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Or they, whoever's saying this.
Okay, so it turns out, they have a bias. So it's one of those movies I borrow from someone who was in the movie club, and then she get movies sent to them, and she would send them and send the ones that she does not want back to Columbia House. Anyways, long story short, it happened to be one of those movies I watched with my brothers and sisters. And it's like I was involved with the movie until my two sisters started giggling like schoolgirls during the skinny dipping scene. And they rated this movie 6 out of 10.
So they enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they enjoyed that scene quite a bit.
Well, I don't know if they enjoyed it, but they just found it weird that they were giggling. I'm like, I laughed. I thought it was funny. I would have giggled.
That scene is shockingly funny.
I think it's like another scene. It's just like, what is this doing here? Like, it kind of makes sense in like the whole thing of it, but it's just such a strange thing. I feel like it had to be shocking. I feel like that's why it was there.
Yes, I think it's a very courageous scene, especially when the rest of the movie is set up in like very proper, very what's the word I'm looking for? Very constrained kind of society.
I think that's meant to be the point as well, right?
Yeah.
That like between him and Cyril, they're completely different.
Yes.
Like another contrast again, where he's wild, he's ready to strip down and jump into a pond with two people he just met.
Yes.
Where he he was asking questions about it, but it wasn't like, hey, let's, how do you feel? She even says, it's like, oh, I used to skinny dip in here until I got caught. So obviously she doesn't want to do it anymore, where, he was like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Another review about that skinny dipping scene.
Oh my gosh.
This person rated this movie 5 out of 10. And she was like, well made, faithful adaptation to E.F Forster's novel about allow intimacy among adults, but more intended for the female audience, especially the skinny dipping scene in the lake scene involving many naked men and their schlongs.
Many.
3.
So few's 2 and many's 3. Got it.
And last one, I'm trying to find. Yeah, I found these quite funny.
Because it's not even like, it's not really that like, I don't even, like, it's not that fanciful. Like, it's not, I don't even like, you're not going in there like, ooh, look what's going on. It's not like a sexy scene.
No, it's not.
It's not sexy at all. Yeah, and I'm like, how? It's just like, oh, I'm a man. There's naked men. Oh, I can't. Ugh. And it's like, just having a good time. They're just running around.
And I think the last point I want to discuss about this movie, I mean, I couldn't find that review for the life of me. What about the overall theme of this movie? So my interpretation is this movie is about authentic experience and oppressed emotions and love. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that because, like, it's her, like, early on in the movie they do, like, Charlotte's like the wall, kind of be like, oh, these are all the things you can't really do. And she always is, like, biting back to be like, oh, no, these are things that shouldn't be such a big deal. And, I trust, even with the George thing when they kiss, he's like, oh, I trust him. I don't think he's going to speak to anyone, which is probably right. He's crazy. He's probably not like...
Probably no one would believe him anyway.
Yeah, or like, I don't think this is something he would be like, oh, I'm glad to like talk to people about this. Yeah.
Probably he was climbing some tree somewhere, getting that messages.
Like later on, when he comes over, they play tennis, and they're reading the book, and that's when it's revealed. That's how Lucy finds out about the kiss.
How random that was.
Well,
like there are millions of books.
Well, that's the thing. And Cyril's reading it, and he's like, oh, there's this strange passage. He's like, oh, Lucy's like, oh, let me read it. It'll be hilarious for us. And she's like reading, and she's like, oh, no. And then Cyril's like, no, let me read it. And then as he reads, it describes exactly
what was going on.
What happened with her and George. And George is sitting there like, oh, that's right. That was a lovely kiss we had, wasn't it?
Did they have another kiss straight after that as well?
So they like walk away. And then he like comes up, like, oh, I love you, and then just like kisses her again. And she's like, stop this, you can't be doing this. And then she like goes back. And I think that's when she really like questions her relationship with Cyril. Because after that, it goes into I think she really thinks about, I need to break this engagement, and goes and, because she does talk to George to be like,
before that,
yeah, we can't do this. This is not happening. I don't love you or whatever. This is not going to happen. He's like, oh. I really love you. I know who you are as a person. I think that's meant to be the whole thing. I understand you as a woman and a person.
Yes.
More than Cyril ever do. He only sees you as like an item to show off.
Yes.
And then later, when she's breaking it off with Cyril, she uses the exact same wording he did. She's like, oh, you don't see me as a woman. You only see me as something to show off. And, you only appreciate things about me, but not me as a person.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, that's a bit on the nose, but I get it.
Yeah.
But then that like leads in, because then after she breaks it off, and it's kind of hush because it's like that's like another thing that's like embarrassing. You've broken up an engagement because you don't get along. Wow, how surprising! And then like she's like, she hears the two friends that she wanted to bring back to the house, and she's like, oh, they're going
to Greece.
Yeah,
to
and
Athens.
She's like, I'm going to go with them so I can get away from this whole situation. And then she gets Charlotte, because she's like, Charlotte, you bloody told the writer about my damn kiss when you said you wouldn't tell nobody. So you're going to help me. You're going to go convince my mum that I'm going to Greece. And she's like, all right, I'm bloody doing it. And then she goes and does that. And then she's getting ready to go to Greece.
That's the scene that Charlotte came over to talk to the mum was funny as well.
Well, that's even great when they're all talking about, I think Cyril, her brother, her and the mother. And she's like, oh, poor Charlotte. And it's like, oh, it's always poor Charlotte, isn't it? And then that was a great scene. That was funny as well. And they're like, oh, poor Charlotte.
I think they were trying to save the roses from the wind or something.
That was later. That's when she was outside when it was really windy and she was like trying to help save them. But But yeah, like, and then that like sets up that whole thing, and then she's like going away, and then she like goes to pick up Charlotte because I think Charlotte was going to go with her, or at least help her get to the airport, I assume, to get out of there. And then she like goes to the Emerson's house, and they're like packing up to leave.
Why did Lucy go to the Emerson's house again? I forgot.
I don't think she was going. I don't know if she was going to pick up Charlotte. They're picking up someone or waiting for a mother or something. I can't quite remember what.
Okay.
But Charlotte was just happened to be there, and she was like talking to Mr. Emerson. It's like, oh, why are you leaving? Initially, he says like, oh, I'm sick. I need to go to this other place or something. Yep. But later on, it's, oh, no. George is in love with Lucy, but knows he can't be with her. And then Charlotte obviously can't keeping a secret. It's like, oh, no, she's divorced, or she's broken the engagement with Cyril. And he's like, oh, that's great. That's great.
You're not supposed to tell anyone. Yeah. No, I would tell anyone.
Yeah, apparently she's, well, we already know she can't keep a secret. So, and then like when Lucy comes to pick up Charlotte later, Miss Emerson's like, oh.
I think that was one of my favorite conversations in the movie. I think the acting for that scene was really great. The message that Mr. Emerson gave out was like, you know, like he loves you, and you know, like he can't be with you. And it turns out Lucy was feeling the same way, and you know she burst into tears. And I think that crying is a very good development of her character. You know, like she has always been oppressed throughout her life, and this is like the choice.
The moment she can be like, hey, I can do what I want now.
Yeah,
I don't have to be too worried about anything else.
But that's the thing as well, like it wasn't an easy choice, you know, like
no, like she was already struggling with it, because I feel like the whole relationship with George is a bit weird. Like I get like the idea of it, but I feel like I don't know if there needed to be like another scene or something that really like captured their like relationship a bit better, because it goes from like the weird, I feel like the thing in Venice is really weird. Like that's what I'm like. She's falling in love with this dude. It's like very strange.
The guy who's climbing on trees and yelling out things.
Like I get the idea of it, but like I feel like there needed to be another scene, because the whole scene when they're like talking with the river, that's like a weird scene. It doesn't like, it's like, oh, there's like a weird secret between us, something happened. And I'm like, I don't think like it didn't feel romantic, or it didn't, to me personally, it didn't feel like anything really romantic.
Yeah.
And then later on, he's like, oh, I love you, and I'm like.
That doesn't make sense. Yeah,
I can see being like caught up in it maybe, but I don't think there was like, it was just a kiss that was probably the most romantic thing that happened between them. Yeah. Like they didn't have like, it wasn't like it didn't feel like a whole moment to lead up to the kiss. It was kind of like she just went for the walk and ran into him, and then he's like, they just kind of kiss.
Yes,
I felt like they needed, like maybe if they needed like to talk for a little bit or something before that, but to me personally, it just felt a bit weird.
I agree, and I think like even though Helena Bonham Carter and Julian Sands, they have a bit of a chemistry, but
like I think there is something there.
But the two characters, they don't really have a strong chemistry towards each other.
I felt like.
So you know, like the kiss might seem a bit forced, and I agree. I think they can include in some scenes where they kind of understand each other a bit more, because like from the moment they met at the dinner party,
when they have that second kiss and he's like, she's telling her to go away, and she's like, oh, I really know you as a woman, and I was like,
you don't really,
not really.
Yeah,
you had a strange kiss together, you had a strange moment where you threw all her photos off into a river, and then before that they didn't, even when he was in England, they didn't really have like a moment.
Correct. Yeah.
Apart from like hearing a reenactment of like their kiss.
Yes.
I feel like they needed just something to be like them like talking to each other about how they could be together or something, more than just like, I understand you as a woman. And I was like, what?
The time that she saw George again was when he first moved into the cottage. You know, like he was helping his father moving stuff in, and she saw him again when he was skinny dipping. Yeah, he was in the nude. So it was a bit shocking re-encounter.
Like I don't mind that. I was like, that was like an interesting way to reintroduce.
Yes.
But they needed after they kiss, it like wasn't straight into it, but they maybe had like another conversation and they like understand each other a bit better.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's what it missed, is like just them. Because I feel like you understand Cyril and her relationship very clearly.
Correct. Yes.
And you can understand why she'd want to be with George, because he is like someone a bit different and more closer to how she would want to live her life, which makes sense. But I feel like her and George quite to me personally, it needed like at least one more thing to say, like, okay, it made sense, but they just needed to show it a bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I think they could have added a few more set pieces between Lucy and George. Maybe another conversation in England. So after that, they were like, oh, like you should never talk about what happened in Italy ever again to anyone, or something like that. And then during that conversation, they can develop that kind of chemistry, like
where it's like, they clearly should be with each other.
Yeah, something like that.
Because at the point, it's just like, it just feels like a bit flingy. Mm-hmm. It's not really close to like what I would see as like, going forward as a relationship. It just feels like more passion.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is nothing wrong with that, but I was just like, because obviously at the end of the movie they go back to Venice together and they're married. Yes. But it was just like, for me personally, I didn't see that. Like I already said,
that ending set piece was a funny one as well. They restart the conversation as the beginning of the movie, and then like a young lady with her chaperone talking about a room with a view, and when George spoke up, I thought, okay, he's gonna do the same as his father. No, he was just showing off his room. Hey, we have a room with a view, and that's it. He didn't offer the room to those people like his father did. Like, yeah, we have a room with a view. That's it. It's like, why even speak, George? You're not contributing anything to the conversation.
He's just a bit of a weird kid still.
But yes, I think the overall message is still quite clear. I like the pace of the movie. It's not that slow. You can kind of follow the story.
Yeah, I don't think it's slow because there is a lot of, like we said before, there's a lot of beautiful shots of like Venice.
Yes.
That are just like, nothing's happening with the story. It is just like a shot of Venice. It doesn't add anything, but it just like building the world a bit.
Yeah.
Like feeling like you're there in Venice.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make it like I thought I might make it feel a bit slow, but
no, it doesn't. No.
Once it like gets going, because that's why I felt like it felt a bit quick when she like gets engaged to Cyril. I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Where did this come from? Because I feel like there wasn't I feel like they maybe needed one conversation. It's like, I thought Cyril was like a good kid or a man. Like they don't like, maybe if that was thrown in there somewhere, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
So it's not as much as a surprise. Not that I don't think it would change the story too much, but
maybe they were trying to make sure that the movie fits in within a certain duration, but
no, that's fair. It's still like a long movie, but
it is.
They're probably still like, we got to,
But do you think that movie would have worked better as a play? They might have had time to include a few more.
I think because, like I said earlier on, it does feel like a play. Like it feels shot like a play. Like it doesn't, not that it doesn't feel like a movie, but that's how it feels like to me. It does feel like a play.
With chapters. With
a lot of the actresses and actors in this are good at like those kinds of, shots and, their acting ability. Plays, yeah. So it's like, that's why I felt like it to me. But I think it would as well. I think it probably would work well in a play. But
okay, would you recommend this movie to your friends, your family?
Probably not. I'm not like much of a romance buff, but if I knew someone that's like kind of into romance movies, like, this is maybe like an interesting movie to kind of go over. Because I do, like you said, I do think it kind of does get the message right of like being like, instead of following onto like society's kind of rules, what they expect from you, or do what kind of makes you happy.
Yeah.
I
would recommend. Yeah, no, I mean, that message is fantastic. I would recommend this movie to my friends, but if they like movies, the first thing I would tell them is just switch up the sound. Watch the movie without sounds. Yeah, just enjoy the sceneries first, and then the second time you watch it, then you can turn on the sound. And then
so what's that, like 6-7 hours?
But I think this movie is very well made. The message is good. And I think that's a good way to end the conversation today. Let us know what you think about this movie in a comment. If you like the conversation, leave a 5-star review. And, if you want us to discuss some other movies, leave them in a comment as well. And I'm Darren.
I'm Tim.
And this has been Movie Beings.